You'll be studying late, son? Let me give you a piece of advice my father gave me when he worked this same floor. This building, it remembers things. Most of these rooms, they're just rooms. But that one, Hall 301, that one's got a memory. That won't fade dot if that room starts to feel cold, and you get the feeling that you're not the only one in there. It's because class is in session, and the professor doesn't like to be interrupted. Every old university has that one room, the one with the story. For us, it was Lecture Hall 301. The legend was classic campus folklore. Professor Alistair Finch, a brilliant, obsessive philosophy professor, had a massive heart attack in the middle of a lecture in the fall of '88. They said his passion for his subject was so intense, he simply refused to leave. The story goes that on quiet nights, if you sit in the back row, you can still hear the faint echo of his final, unfinished lecture. Of course, I didn't believe it. I was a student of logic and reason, not ghost stories. I was just there because 301 was the only lecture hall open 24/7, a perfect, quiet place for a desperate all-nighter before my metaphysics final. I saw the room for what it was, old, dusty, and smelling faintly of chalk and stale coffee. A place of learning, not a place of haunting. I was about to learn that sometimes they are the same thing. The first strange thing was the smell. I'd been studying for hours, the only sound the frantic scratch of my pen on paper. Then, a sudden, powerful scent of chalk dust filled the air, so thick it was almost choking, as if someone had just clapped two erasers together right next to my head. I coughed, my eyes watering. At the same time, the temperature in the room plunged. A deep, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the building's ancient HVAC system. I looked up towards the front of the hall. The chalkboard was clean. The lectern was empty. The room was exactly as it had been. But the feeling, the distinct, prickling feeling of a room that was empty a second ago, but isn't anymore. The chill faded, the smell vanished, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I was no longer alone. The class, I felt, was about to begin. I tried to shake it off, putting on my headphones to listen to a recording of my current professor's last lecture. The familiar, droning voice was comforting. I closed my eyes, trying to focus. That's when the recording glitched. The professor's voice dissolved into a burst of static, and then a new voice spoke, clear as day, directly into my ears. It was an older voice, crisp and imperious, with a faint British accent. The concept of the ideological imprint, the voice declared, posits that a powerful, sustained thought can leave a permanent residue on its environment. My blood ran cold. It wasn't my professor. I ripped the headphones off. The silence of awe. The hall rushed back in. I shakily rewound the recording. The part where the voice had spoken was just normal lecture audio. It wasn't on the recording. It had been broadcast directly into my head. I was hearing a lecture that hadn't been given in over 30 years. I should have left. I know I should have. But the student in me, a part that craves knowledge, was hooked. I stayed, my fear battling my curiosity. I packed up my books, my hands trembling. As I was about to leave, I glanced one last time at the chalkboard at the front of the hall. My heart stopped. It wasn't clean anymore. Written in the center of the board, in a frantic, elegant, old-fashioned script, was a single philosophical question. If a memory exists with no one to remember it, is it real? I hadn't heard a single footstep. I hadn't heard the squeak of chalk. It had just appeared. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't in my head. This was physical proof. A message, written by an unseen hand. It was a question from a dead man, and I felt with a terrifying certainty that he was waiting for an answer. The next day, I went to the university archives. I needed to know the real story, not the campus legend. The archivist, a woman who seemed to be a permanent fixture of the library, found his file. Professor Alistair Finch. His photo showed a man with fierce, intelligent eyes that seemed to bore right through you. His academic record was brilliant, but his later work was strange. He became obsessed with a fringe theory he called residual consciousness, the idea that a person's last, most powerful thought could become imprinted on a physical space, replaying itself like a recording. The file contained the official incident. Report from his death. He'd been giving a guest lecture to a packed house, speaking with a feverish intensity about his theory. He had just posed a question to the students when he clutched his chest, collapsed behind the lectern, and died. His last thought was never completed. His final question was never answered. That night, I went back. I don't know why. I think I had to. I sat in the back row, and I waited. As the clock struck midnight, the cold returned, colder than ever. The hall flickered, and the air shimmered. And then he was there. Professor Finch. He was standing behind the lectern, not as a solid form, but as a shimmering, translucent figure of blue-white light. He wasn't alone. In the seats around me, the faint, ghostly outlines of his students from 1988 appeared, all looking forward, their faces pale and attentive. I was invisible to them. I was watching a memory, a spectral reenactment of the final lecture. The professor began to speak, his ghostly voice filling the hall, not with a whisper, but with the full, passionate force of his conviction. He was lecturing about memory, about reality, about the echoes we leave behind. I was no longer a student. I was a witness to a ghost, trapped in the eternal, repeating loop of his own obsession. I watched the ghostly lecture for what felt like hours. He was brilliant. His arguments were compelling, his passion infectious. I found myself leaning forward, captivated by the mind of a dead man. He was building towards a grand conclusion, his voice rising, his spectral form seeming to burn brighter with intensity. The mind is not a vessel, he declared, his ghostly hand slamming down on the lectern. It is a transmitter. Its energy, its strongest convictions, do not simply vanish. Upon death, they echo. He was pacing now, his eyes wild with feverish excitement. He was reaching the climax of his life's work. Therefore, the ultimate question is not whether we leave a mark on the world, but whether that mark can, in fact, become a reality unto itself. Consider this. He clutched the lectern, a sudden spectral pain crossing his face. His voice hitched. He was dying. The echo was about to reach its end. The professor struggled for breath, his form flickering like a dying flame. His spectral students began to look concerned, their ghostly faces turning to whispers. He fought to speak, to finish his final thought. He looked out over the phantom class, his piercing eyes seeming to scan every face, desperately seeking an answer. Consider. He gasped, his voice now a strained whisper. If a thought is powerful enough to survive the thinker, who then is truly the ghost? He collapsed behind the lectern, and the entire scene, the professor, the students. The ghostly light vanished into nothing, plunging the hall back into cold silence and darkness. And I finally understood. He wasn't just replaying a memory. He was trapped in an incomplete thought, a question without an answer. The loop could never end because the lecture was never finished. He was a ghost, haunted by his own final question. I knew I had to go back one last time. I waited for the haunting to begin again, for the ghostly lecture to reach its climax. As the spectral Professor Finch clutched his chest, gasping out his final question, who then is truly the ghost? I did the one thing no one had done in over 30 years. I stood up. The ghostly students turned to look at me, her phantom eyes wide with surprise. The dying professor's gaze locked onto mine. My voice shaking, I answered him. "The one who is forgotten," I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall. "We are, Professor. We're the ghosts in your memory." For a moment, the spectral professor stared at me, his pained expression softening into one of profound, shocking understanding. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He had his answer. The loop was complete. He didn't vanish in a flash. He simply faded. The ghost of Professor Finch gave a slow, respectful nod, and his form dissolved into a soft, peaceful light that gently faded into nothing. The ghostly students vanished with him. The unnatural cold left the room, replaced by a simple, quiet stillness. The haunting was over. I never stayed late in Hall 301 again. I didn't have to. The air in there is different now. It's just a room, dusty, old, and smelling of chalk. But sometimes, when I walk past, I think about Professor Finch. He wasn't a monster. He was just a brilliant mind with one last important question to ask. And sometimes, all a ghost really needs is for a student to finally have the right answer.